Thank you for joining us today. My name is D'Amore-McKim. I'm the Assistant Dean of Development at the D'Amore-McKim School of Business. We're so pleased you're able to be here with us today with this prestigious panel to talk about supply chain disruptions in the pharma industry. Today's talk is sponsored by the Institute of Supply Management, and we are grateful for their partnership, and thank you all for being here with us. A few housekeeping items before I hand it over to Emery Trahan. As a note to all, this talk is being recorded, so please keep that in mind as you ask questions. We ask everyone to keep their audio and video off throughout the discussion, as it will help us have a cleaner recording to be able to share with more folks after the talk. All questions that you have can be put into the chat. They can either be sent directly to me or to the whole group. And once we get to the Q&A portion, we'll be sure to share them with the panel. And I think that is about it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Emery Trahan, our Associate Dean of Faculty and Research at the Business School. Thank you, Emery.
Thank you, Debbie, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Supply Chain Disruptions in the Pharma Industry. This is our 9th D'Amore-McKim School of Business COVID-19 Resilience Talk. I'm Emery Trahan, the Senior Associate Dean of Faculty and Research and a Professor of Finance in the D'Amore-McKim School of Business, and I'm pleased to be here to kick off the talk this morning. First, a little bit about this event in the Resilience Talk series. In an effort to bring our community together during this uncertain time, we're hosting virtual events with faculty experts and alumni thought leaders around COVID-19 crisis-related topics. We hope to bring value to you, our community, by providing access to a forum where we can all share ideas and learn about the experiences of others. And we want to provide an opportunity to continue your lifelong learning. These sessions are not simply prepackaged offerings, but rather a platform for unscripted and interactive conversations by D'Amore-McKim for the D'Amore-McKim community. We're pleased to have with us today Professor Nada Saunders. Nada will moderate the discussion with a distinguished panel of industry leaders. Let me say a bit more about Nada, and then I'll let her introduce the other members of the panel. Issues surrounding supply chain have been painfully evident during the COVID crisis, and that was really the impetus for this conversation. As you know, pharma is an important driver of the Boston economy, and our graduates are increasingly employed in this sector, so this talk is both timely and a great opportunity to convene this specific community. And Professor Saunders is a recognized expert who's been immersed in this space, particularly during the crisis. So Nada is a distinguished professor of supply chain management at D'Amore-McKim and is an internationally recognized expert in predictive analytics, risk management, and supply chain management. She holds a PhD and an MBA from The Ohio State University, as well as a BS in mechanical engineering. Her research includes identifying best practices in forecasting and creating a resilient supply chain. Professor Saunders has held a range of leadership roles in both academic and professional organizations and has served on numerous executive boards. She's also authored over 100 scholarly works and served on the editorial boards of prominent journals in her field. Her latest book, The Human Machine, explores the impact of artificial intelligence on the workforce. And I'd say that I've had the privilege of working with Nada and can tell you from experience that she is most impressive and is also just a genuine and great colleague to have. So I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, Professor Nada Saunders. And Nada, I'll turn things over to you.
Emery, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful words, the kind introduction, and I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for what I think is a really important conversation. Now, as you all know, the COVID pandemic has created disruptions of critical supply chains, including those in the pharmaceutical sector. And as we learn of the protracted nature of this pandemic, and we're seeing now that it is going to be with us for quite some time, questions continue to be raised of actions that need to be taken to mitigate disruptions, to prevent them, to create resilience, and to be able to look for plans for the medium term as well as the long term to respond to this, what is currently facing us and what may be facing us. So this session will look towards a collective discussion so we can together look at supply chain challenges within the pharmaceutical industry and identify together plans that are being made, that are being considered towards really rebuilding the future. What are companies in the pharmaceutical sector doing now? What will even the new normal look like when we pass this? Now, I have to tell you that this session really is a nexus between business and science. It is also a nexus between supply chain management and the pharmaceutical industry. Now, you have to remember, supply chain management is about producing and delivering products. And in the pharmaceutical industry, that is essential. Yes, innovation is at the foundation and the core of pharma, but so is the ability to manufacture, to actually create the products, to scale production, to distribute, and to satisfy, supply patients with the needed medications, needed pharma. And so supply chain management is an integral part of this. So we have many questions. And to help us answer these questions, we have assembled a truly distinguished panel. I'm really grateful personally for their participation. I know they are very busy right now, but they have taken the time to help us understand a little bit more of what is going on. So now what I would like to do is ask each of the panelists if you would please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'll jump right in. So my name's Ken Baldwin. I'm the Senior Director of Sourcing and Procurement at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, where I currently head up our Center of Excellence in Operations Group.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How about Michael Bach?
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Bach. I am the head of product operations for biologics for Takeda here in Lexington, Massachusetts. So I manage end-to-end manufacturing and supply for two of our molecules, Takhzyro and Gattex. And I'm a 2010 graduate of D'Amore-McKim.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. Subs, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Thank you, Nada. Hi, my name is Subs Tripathi. I'm an executive director within procurement, leading a process called Procure to Pay within Novartis. It's a global role, so I kind of do it not just for the US, but across the world. I've been with Novartis for 17 years. I'm based out of East Hanover, New Jersey, and I really look forward to answering many of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, Bill Barbo.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Bill Barbo from Charles River Laboratories. So the name of the company is Charles River, and that is the Charles River behind me. I'm also a graduate of D'Amore-McKim School of Business. I'm not going to tell you what year. Michael graduated much sooner than I did, or later than I did. Yeah, Charles River is actually part of the supply chain that my esteemed colleagues ultimately deliver the medicines and therapies for folks, and we're part of that. We're part of that process. We're a CRO. I'll take just a minute to describe that, since I'm a little bit different than the other three folks that have joined me today. As a CRO, a contract research organization, our primary business is to do the discovery and development of pharmaceuticals for the biopharmaceutical industry. This is preclinical, so this is very early in the process of discovering new drugs and developing those drugs and testing them for pharmacology and efficacy and safety long before they actually are given to patients in clinical trials. Different company, that's not what we do. So our customers are Ken and Michael and Subs. They're the biopharmaceutical clients, both large and small, big pharma, all the way to very small virtual biotech companies. Of course, academic research institutions, disease foundations, We also have so in addition to that R&D component, we also have a manufacturing side of our business. Gets even closer to the supply chain that we're going to talk about today, in that we help companies like these folks continue to do product release testing throughout the manufacturing process to make sure that the drugs that show up in our pharmacies that we end up taking are actually produced in a sterile environment, testing them for endotoxins and microbial contaminations that may impact the supply chain. So throughout the pandemic, given that role, as you might imagine, that would also include things like IV solutions, any medical devices, et cetera, that people might get that need to be tested. We do all that work. So throughout the pandemic, we've been an essential business that's been open. We're global facilities, North America, Europe, and Asia. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. Great to be here.
Excellent, and thank you to all of you, and Bill, thank you for clarifying that, so we can actually see that we have, you know, different elements of the supply chain here, and particularly what the role of CRL is, as many folks listening may not be aware. So let's dive in. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to go for about 20 minutes or so, asking our wonderful panel a series of questions, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A and take some of the questions you may have. And we're all looking forward to learning so much from this panel. So what I would like to do, let me kick it off with Ken Baldwin. There's so many things Regeneron is doing right now. And we're also hearing so much about resilience as being this component, this critical element of the supply chain. So Ken, if I may ask you, how is Regeneron thinking about resiliency in the wake of this pandemic, and thinking about transformation in light of these new realities we're facing?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and great to be a part of this panel today. So thank you for the invitation. You know, this pandemic is different, right, than a normal supply chain disruption. I mean, it's one thing if you have a supplier that goes out of business or has financial difficulty, or if there's a natural disaster, you know, a hurricane or something, where you have a finite area to deal with, right? But maybe you have a secondary supplier, or you've got other places you can kind of go to do things. In this situation, right, I mean, the whole world shut down, right? And it severely affected a lot of industries, although some industries obviously were exempted, like pharma and others. You know, so for us, work never stopped. But for other elements of the supply chain, you know, some of the work got disrupted, or, you know, everybody heard about, you know, the hoarding of PPE in, you know, different countries around the world that were producing a lot of these things that we relied on. You know, the government stepped in a lot of places and, you know, took stuff in to help protect those essential workers, et cetera. Then you had companies, you know, Regeneron included, who, you know, reached out to our supply chain partners and our suppliers to make sure that we had, you know, the PPE that we needed to continue to do the science and the research and manufacturing of the drugs that our patients rely on, in many cases for their health and well-being. So it's a bit different, right? It's a bit different. And so within Regeneron, we've had to think about, you know, how do we deal with this stuff? And I don't know, resiliency is interesting, right? Because I think what people are learning from this is, you know, there's no snapping back to the way things were. I think people are, you know, looking at this as a transformational opportunity to say, well, we could go back to the way things were, like bring everybody back into the offices and sit side by side in cubes, or sit in, you know, meetings with 50 people and you know, do those things. Or we can leverage what we've learned over the last, you know, 60 days, 90 days, and try to think differently about what do we really think our organizational structure is, and what do we think our needs are. Obviously, you know, if you're a scientist and you're doing research, I mean, you can't do that from home in your basement, right? I mean, you have to go into an office, you have to go to a lab, you have to actually, you know, do stuff with your hands, and the only place to do that is in an office environment. Or if you're in the manufacturing space like we have today, you know, those folks still need to run our machines, clean the lines, make sure we have good product for our patients. So, you know, there's challenges in, you know, what we can do in that environment. But the whole social distancing thing is definitely something that the organization is considering. I think for some of us, you know, in the G&A functions, right, I'll say the non-essential scientists, you know, we've been working from home, you know, for the last, you know, 90 days or so, 60, 90 days. And thank God for the internet and technology now. I mean, you know, what we're doing today could not have happened 20 years ago, right? And it would have been a completely different conversation situation. But today we have, you know, Zoom meetings, and for at least at Regeneron, for those of us who are working remote, we haven't missed a beat, really, right? I mean, all the meetings we have to have are still continuing to have. I actually feel like we're doing more work because people think that you should be accessible, you know, 24 hours a day or you know, 10 or 15 hours a day, and so they'll Zoom call you, they'll Skype call you, they'll do whatever, and you know, very rarely are you getting a lunch break or a break in between. You're kind of grabbing food when you can, when there's not a meeting, you know, in place of things. So I think for Regeneron, you know, we're looking at our supply chain in a probably a slightly different way than some, because we weren't really very global to begin with. We're more of a US-centric supply chain, but for those areas, you know, there's been these concepts for many years now: lean, just-in-time logistics, et cetera, et cetera. To us, I think we don't necessarily subscribe to all of those because of the importance of, if we go, you know, one day without having a raw material or something we need, the cost of that inventory, the cost of, you know, holding excess inventory or even throwing away inventory that goes bad is not worth the cost of, you know, having our patients not have the drugs they need to save their lives or to enhance their lives. So, you know, we've even probably taken a different look at that, and, you know, probably adding up extra inventory and working much more collaboratively with our suppliers to make sure that we have the right safety stocks in place, we have the right contracts in place, and really leveraging heavily or relying heavily on those concepts of category management, supplier relationship management, and really driving those relationships with our key suppliers even up to a higher level where there's really more top-to-top relationships and partnerships to continue to support our organization.
And Ken, if I can add to that, I mean, you hit some really important issues. The first one is that we haven't seen anything like this, right? Because we have both demand and supply shocks at the same time. You also, the other issue you brought up that I think is really important to underscore, and I think leading companies understand this. This is different. The world will look very different post-COVID. And if we're going to get through this, we have to reorganize and we have to work in a very different kind of a way. So you guys clearly get it. The other issue that you had brought up was lean and just in time, which I think is extremely important for everyone to understand, especially in the pharma sector. The rules that would apply to other industries don't apply in healthcare because you really can't run out of stock. You can't afford that. So if I can, on that note, you know, pivot over to Michael for a second at Takeda to look at that customer focus, that, you know, ensuring that we have enough supply to meet patient needs. If I may ask you, Michael, what measures has Takeda taken to ensure supply to patients in the current environment?
Sure, thank you. Great question. So I guess the pivot on what Ken was saying. So I'm in the opposite boat. I'm in the massive global organization. We have 34 manufacturing plants worldwide. We have one on every continent except Antarctica, which, give it time, I'm sure we'll put one there for tax purposes or for some reason. But as you were saying, we can't run out, right? I work with the two products that I run are ultra rare diseases. It's not like an Advil. It's not like a Tylenol. Oh, if I miss my medicine, I'll just take another tomorrow. If these patients miss their doses, they are going to the emergency room. They're putting a further burden on the already stressed healthcare system. So we've been working very, very diligently for years. This wasn't just something we started recently, but to ensure patient supply, all of our products are made on multiple plants, multiple continents. So if we have an issue in Italy, we can shift production to Australia. If we have an issue in Japan, we can shift production to the United States. So for the three major steps within biologics, drug substance, drug product, and packaging, we have a very risk-adverse program where we split it up and send it to different plants to spread our risk out. Along those lines, since the pandemic hit, kind of as Ken was saying, I mean, patient first. I mean, that has been very clear from day one. We have not talked about revenue. We have not talked about how much this is going to cost. We just ensure that we continue to provide medication to patients. So what we've done recently is started to build more WIP. So at each one of those stages, we're starting to hold more. Yeah, the financial accounting people and the finance people are mad at me, but at the end of the day, the patient needs their medication. They don't care. They don't care how I get them the vial. They only care that the vial shows up and the vial is what it is, and it treats their indication.
And if I could add, Michael, I just want to clarify to those that don't know, WIP is work in process, right. Work in process inventory.
Yeah, stuff that we can't sell yet.
Right.
I mean, we've even gone so far. Last week, we have one of my products. It has a 48-hour shelf life. From when we put it in the vial to when it expires is 48 hours. We have 36 hours to get it to the patient. We've gone so far as to we've booked private jets to get product to patients because FedEx can't get it there. Borders are shut down in Europe. We can't go from Singapore to Malaysia. The borders are changing and are not allowing certain products through. So we've had to become. We talk about just in time. I mean, we're buckling vials into seats on planes that are flying with no passengers because air travel has reduced. But last week, I think we set the record. We paid $136,000 for a one-way flight for one vial. So it is truly patient-centric. So our goal is that of all the medicines we make, that no patient goes without. So it's truly unbelievable to see the supply chain get that agile and that lean to be able to support that. And also pressuring our procurement guys, like Ken was talking about, to make sure that we keep feeding the beast. The beast, the plants, we refer to them as the beast. The beast is hungry, and it always needs to eat. So it's a delicate balance between the supply chain guys on my end, and then the Ken, who's actually his name is Ken at Takeda too. So the Ken that I yell at when we're out of salt or we're out of bags or we're out of it's a very delicate balance because we're all competing for the same goods, right? We're all competing for the same cell culture media. We're all competing for the same bags. We're all competing for the same test tubes. So it's a very delicate balance to ensure that we're not hoarding. We have what we need, and we are producing exactly what we need because we don't have extra storage space. So it's give and take.
And I have to say that's really impressive. A lot of people may not know how much cargo actually travels in the belly of commercial aircraft. And the fact that we have reduced commercial aircraft so much has put so much pressure for companies. And it's incredible, I mean, the numbers that you just quoted and the amount of monies that is being spent now in order to move these products in the incredibly short shelf life is a really impressive way in terms of what you're handling it. So what we're hearing, I mean, we're really seeing a whole new reality in terms of your companies navigate. Let me, ask Subs if you want to tell us a little bit. So what does the new normal actually look like within pharma? What do you think?
Thank you for that, Neda. Michael and Ken talked about different facets of it already, actually. But what I will try to do it is in probably 3 different areas that I see currently. The first one is around supply chain. Supply chain for us, Novartis is similar to Takeda in terms of we have factories all over the world. The supply chain for us had been focused on 2 things. One was around efficiency, and the second was around how do we ensure that we have enough products for our patient worldwide. But now, in addition, we have resiliency. Can we face all these external shocks that are coming, just like COVID, and still manage to deliver to our patients, just like Michael said, from a patient's first perspective? It means that, already in Novartis, we were trying to make our supply chain much more customer facing, and that was based on very personalized therapies that we have had in cell and gene therapies. But now more and more we are seeing that not just for cell and gene therapies, which are highly personalized, but for our general mass produced drugs, how can we make our supply chain more customer facing? And that is really going to accelerate with COVID. And I believe not just for Novartis, that will be true for most pharma companies. COVID will just accelerate that. Other key driver is, long time ago in the 2000s, people used to say the earth is flat. I think distance is back now. The earth is going back to becoming round, essentially. And so what does that mean? It means quite a bit for many of our value-driven thing, both in supply chain and clinical and commercial. In clinical especially, we are now trying to figure out how can we do remote clinical trials. That is a very big thing for us. And how can we scale it up? That is, again, not just for Novartis, I'm speaking from pharma as a whole, that we'll have to kind of try to figure this answer out. Similarly, engagement with our healthcare professionals, who in late terms is our doctors, right? How do we engage with them in a very systematic way, so that not only are we engaging with them, but also ensuring that our patients who are not necessarily, and most of our stuff is not COVID related, how can we ensure that our non-COVID patients get the therapy they need, whether it's life-saving drugs like in oncology or heart or other non-life-threatening drugs, right? How can we do that? And finally, the changing customer behavior and our industry structures. In the past, pharma biotech was a kind of an industry, but now we are getting both collaboration and cooperation from across beyond just pharma, right? Google is getting into healthcare space in different ways. So how can we continue doing that engagement with different partners and collaboration, not just within pharma but outside pharma? As even in COVID, as we look at vaccines and antivirals that are coming up, there's a lot of data and information that is being shared. I know within all our pharma companies, but even with many of the universities and other organizations. Continues to accelerate as we look at these different industry structures that are changing. So those are kind of the 3 themes that I think are the new normal.
Excellent, excellent. And one of the issues that you had brought up that I have found in my experience that is so challenging to industries across the board, but particularly in pharma, is scaling. And I don't think people realize how challenging, how difficult it is. So even right now, as we're talking about treatments, as we're talking about developing vaccines, going through the clinical trials, and everybody is so excited, are we going to get a treatment? Are we going to get a vaccine? Just the ability to scale enough to meet population needs on a large scale, and then to be able to distribute that is a huge undertaking. And I think it's going to challenge the industry tremendously. So I'm really glad that you had brought that up. So as we're talking about these issues, let me switch over to Bill. And Bill, we're talking about the new normal, what the sector is going to look like. Was there any kind of pivot that you found at CRL operations or shift in focus in order to support or aid this entire response and effort?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a great question. There was, and I do think, picking up on what Subs was just saying, that science is going to be our path. So the new normal is going to be baked in science. I'm convinced of that. What you're seeing, Nada, that you just mentioned about new therapies and vaccines in the reports on the news, is a fraction of what the biopharmaceutical industry is actually working on today. I get to see that up close and personal, and we're supporting those efforts as a research organization. So right from the beginning, we saw a lot of inbound requests from clients who were working on COVID-related therapies, vaccines, and we very quickly, our senior leadership team said, yeah, that all goes to the front of the line. We're going to take whatever excess capacity we have to help execute and drive those scientific advancements and move them up front. And like Michael said, it wasn't about cost or revenue or any of that. It was about helping to get the science going and to get us there faster. In fact, we're doing all kinds of creative, I'm going to call them creative business models around helping our clients do that. And some of them are academic institutions, of course, that are doing a lot of this research. But it's not just drug related. It's also about the projects around how to sterilize equipment, PPE, make sure that sterilization works. Projects around how to use a ventilator on multiple patients at the same time. All of these are kind of odd things, but based on our infrastructure, we could do that. So it's quite rewarding. It's been very interesting, very rewarding for our employees, especially our frontline employees, who, like many of my colleagues here, who unlike me, who's working from home, but who get up every day, leave their families, and go into those labs to do that work. Really rewarding for them to be that close to, to the science and to what the advancements could be in the future. It's really rewarding.
And actually, everything you described is so important. Even something that sounds really benign, right, in terms of how do you sterilize PPE. I know right now so many healthcare professionals, they're actually looking at, what is effective and safe in terms of sterilizing N95 masks in order to be able to reuse them. So there's a whole host of things it sounds like you guys are doing and have been doing in order to help. I have to tell you guys, I am keeping track of the time, and because I know we have to open it up for Q&A in a little bit, but what I would like to do is maybe do one more round robin and ask our terrific panel each just one really quick question, if that's okay. And again, I could talk with you guys for a really long time because this is so important to us right now. As we're talking about transformation and innovation, Ken, let me ask you a question. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different entities. What has that actually meant to Regeneron?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It can mean a lot of things depending on who you're talking to in Regeneron. But one good example that I'd like to share is in the way in which Regeneron is bringing or working on bringing treatments to COVID to the public, right? Regeneron prides itself on its unique technology, homegrown technology built over the last 30 years, our ability to get in and solve very complex medical problems out there in the world. I mean, you can go and look most recently in collaboration with BARDA and the federal government. We, were asked to participate and see if we can help come up with a treatment, more or less treatment cure for Ebola. Our scientists jump right in using our proprietary technologies, and in a relatively short period of time of a couple of years, working in a very remote environments in Africa, the team was able to develop a cocktail treatment cure for Ebola, and the results were so good that there was a head-to-head kind of competition going on by the government between us and others, and they shut the trial down early because our product was so far superior to what other was able to deliver. But what I think so in how we've used that now to work on and attack this COVID problem is typically where you're looking at putting in preclinical, clinical trials, and these programs are very rigorous because obviously patient safety is number one. So it's like do no harm, right? So you don't want to jump out too fast and get stuff in the hands of patients that isn't thoroughly tested, because you don't want to hurt people more than you're helping people. But in collaboration with the government, using our technology and our process, something, getting into a clinical trial, something that would take, 6, 9, 12 months to build the protocols, to get the protocols approved, etc., were done in literally a matter of weeks. And Regeneron kind of broke our own molds about how we work with our CROs, how we get a clinical trial initiated. And actually, probably maybe have read, we actually started enrolling our first patients in our clinical trial just this week. And we hope that
it was on the news yesterday.
Right, and our CEO, those guys are out there.
Sounds
and
like
so,
it's going to be good, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we don't know if it's going to be good, but we broke the mold in transformation on an innovation about how quickly we think as an industry, and I think others are doing it with vaccines, et cetera, how quickly, working in collaboration with our government partners, we were able to get in to clinical trial very, very fast. So we're optimistic, we're hopeful it works, and hopefully over the course of the next 6 or 8 weeks, we'll know whether or not our solution is going to be effective. And we talked about cost and revenues and profits. Similarly, so we are producing at risk in our manufacturing thousands and thousands of gallons of material that, if it works, at least we'll have product that we can quickly go into filling into vials and getting out to patients. But if it doesn't, it's a commitment our CEO made to say the cost doesn't matter. If we have to throw it away and we eat tens of millions of dollars of cost because it didn't work, so be it. But it's the right thing to do, and I think Takeda, I think you mentioned, others are doing the same thing. It's everybody, the whole industry, from what I've heard, they're taking cost, and it's a real risk to us, but you know what, it's the right thing to do as an industry.
It's really impressive, and I was reading yesterday and I was very optimistic, hopeful, especially with the 2 antivirals having a stronger effect in terms of possible mutation. On that note, let me go ahead. I want to ask Michael, if you would, because you had mentioned the risks, you had mentioned the initiatives. Michael, let me ask you, how has all this impacted the regulatory landscape as we talk about the risks and coming up with new therapies?
Yeah, so great question. It's similar to what the FDA did with clinical trials, right? All stopped, no new trials starting, no dosing patients because travel and patients going to clinical sites stopped. We've also noticed a massive, an all stop from the agency on inspections. We can't have, the FDA is not inspecting facilities and, completing what we call PAIs, pre-approval inspections. So when a molecule goes from phase 3 clinical to commercial, they've got to come in and they've got to kick the tires and check the plant. So we have several facilities that are waiting for their PAI to bring new innovative therapies to patients, new drugs, orphan drug designations, and we've had to get creative. We've done this with FDA inspectors down in Bethesda, Maryland, and walked them through the facility via Microsoft Teams. We've done video Zoom meetings showing purification trains and showing different trainings going on, so the agency could virtually approve and sign off on things. So we've had to adapt. Like everyone else has said, the new norm, we're going to have to get used to using technology to be able to get patients new and innovative therapies. So because as everybody else has said, the R&D engine isn't slowing down, right? We're still making, and the labs are still working, and people are still coming out with new therapies, and we've got to be ready to get those to patients. So yeah, it's certainly interesting.
That's really, really important. And I again, as I had said earlier, I could listen to you guys for a very long time. And I know that we have to make time for Q&A. Let me ask Subs and Bill start with Subs first. So as we're talking about innovation, can you just tell us a little bit about some of the innovative practices that you guys are embracing as well?
Yeah, there are many, but I'll just take a couple of examples probably. One is like everybody mentioned in clinical trials, all these drug discovery efforts we are doing, we are just not going to do it ourselves. So we have teamed up with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, University of California, Berkeley, just like AstraZeneca has done with Oxford. There's innumerable examples of that across pharma that is happening. And, companies like Regeneron and others are also collaborating with other pharma companies also. So a lot of that is happening, and that is really innovative for our industry. We've always had a thick wall. Of course, we would have partnerships with universities, but we've always had a thick wall, and the regulatory part of our climate also ensures that we have that thick wall. But information and data is flowing, and we are collaborating quite a bit. The other part that small things are not small for us, but small thing in the entire scenario of delivering a drug to a patient, things like we have congresses in the pharma industry, which are big conferences where, we just had one in ASCO in Chicago for oncology, which has 40,000 people attending in a normal year. That was canceled. But as Michael said, research continues. Research is not stopping. We have new things coming up. And so how do we engage our doctors for many of these drugs, which some may be COVID, some may be vaccine related, but in oncology, many of them are not vaccine related, right? And so how do we engage that? So innovative things like our entire team worked and came up with virtual booths where, doctors could go in and have a similar easy way to understand really difficult research, right? You can't sit for 8 hours. It's easy to sit in a congress for 8 hours and look up and understand research, but you can't do that virtually. We all know that. So how do you make it much more engaging for the doctors and ensure that they understand that? So, people can go to the Novartis virtual booth, which is online, and see some of that innovative things. But each of our companies is doing something very similar, trying to kind of engage our patients, engage our doctors, engage the entire society around it.
Excellent, thank you. So we've really touched on a lot of big issues, innovation, but we also touched on a number of tactical issues and tactical problems. Bill, if I could just hand it over to you just for a quick, can you tell us a little bit about some of the operational, managerial, internal responses that you guys have been dealing with?
Yeah, sure. The short answer is crisis management, right? So we've all been through it in various parts of our businesses for other reasons, and we took a page out of that playbook for this one. So as I mentioned, we were an essential business, and it was critical that we kept our employees healthy, protect them, get them to and from work, which wasn't easy in places like China or Northern Italy in the beginning, and California, quite frankly, in the beginning. So we took 8 very senior people, including 2 EC members, created a crisis management team. It was a full-time job. They met every single day and developed procedures and playbooks and talked to state and federal governments about quote unquote passports to allow employees to travel safely without being detained, and everything you can think of, from contract tracing of employees who came in contact with people who were tested positive to transportation of protecting our own supply chain for critical supplies coming in and out of our labs around the world. And in areas that were particularly challenging, sharing our own supplies with our own companies. Some of what Mike and Sub said about shipping things around to protect our own supply chains.
Excellent, thank you. Those are really important issues, and actually the things that you just described are essential not only to the pharma industry and companies within pharma, but across the board. And I've been talking to so many companies, and the first order of business is to set up that crisis management team. And for anybody listening, if you haven't done it, you should have done it yesterday. So it needs to be done ASAP. Thank you. I have so many questions I could ask you guys, but I know that I have used up all my time. Debbie, if I can hand it over to you, and if you would give us some of the questions.
Absolutely. I have a great one here. It says, we tend to hear a lot about what's going wrong. Can you speak about what's going well? Which recent changes in terms of policies or processes do you think will have a big impact on the pharma sector for the better?
So, I mean, I'll just jump in. So I think what's going well is really the government and private industry collaboration within the pharma sector. I think several of us have talked about, what's doing, what the FDA is doing different, unique, and I think everybody realizing this is kind of an all hands on deck kind of approach to this, and the government's willingness to be flexible and modify, how things are happening has allowed the industry to respond. Version is, I think what's going well is the government and industry partnerships that have allowed the industry to really step up. We always knew we could, but we have these rules in place that we have to follow. Again, it's all about patient safety, and so they were there for the right reason. But I think the flexibility and the all hands-on approach to working together to solve this problem is really working well.
Excellent, excellent. I don't know if we lost Debbie or not. Debbie?
I am here.
Excellent, okay.
That was the froze. All right, I have some more questions for the group. How do you ensure that short supply drugs get to the patients versus going into wholesalers' inventory?
So let me unmute myself before I answer it to just myself and my daughter. So we, for the ultra rare disease drugs or the drugs that have orphan drug designation, we do in the U.S. specifically, we do no work with wholesalers on those drugs. One, they're way too expensive, and two, they're overseen by the specialty pharmacy network. So it's not a normal. You can't just go to CVS and get some of these therapies. They would come from a specialty pharmacy at a hospital or at a major research university, such as that. So the supply chain is very direct. I mean, we get the prescription from the treating physician, and within 12 hours we've shipped. That's for the 48-hour product, but for the rest of our orphan drugs, we manage them through the specialty pharmacy network here in the United States. We do some channel partnering with DHL and Sharp and Almac and some of these other companies to get to the more obscure areas and obscure countries that don't have set up 3PL or 4PL supply chain. So we don't really use them, but I would wonder if colleagues from Regeneron or Novartis see something similar.
I think my answer would be similar to Michael's. The specialty pharma, we just use them for those kind of drugs.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, same for Regeneron. I mean, we're a biopharmaceutical organization, so our drugs are injectables, so there's not a lot that we would go through wholesale.
Yeah.
All right, I have another question for the group. I was curious to know what you all think about remote work continuing in supply chain once the pandemic subsides. Are there advantages to remote work that will be permanently integrated in the future of biopharma sector?
Yeah, maybe I can go on this one. Our CEO has made a big splash that we should be looking at what he calls distributed work environment more and more. As he said, just because traditionally we have worked 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever in the past, this environment doesn't mean that going forward we should be working that way. So not only are we looking at changing the way we work, all our facilities are also being looked at to see what revamp can be done, whether it's for research, clinical development, commercial, and shared services like our groups, to ensure that we have the right work environment for different type of people. This could mean potentially that relooking at our real estate space across the world and seeing do we need so much, do we not need so much, even if we need, what should be the configuration of that. Most of our companies had gone down to open space in the last 5 to 10 years. Is the open space the right way to do this? We are also going through something called activity-based working, and that is also kind of the new way of doing it. But how close should we be all sitting next to each other, etc., has to be kind of thought through. So really, the future is going to be very different from what it was 4 months ago for most of us.
Yeah, I agree with that, Subs. I would say it would be a shame if we wasted the opportunity to do some things differently. You know, virtual collaborations. I think, you know, I lead the sales and marketing organization at Charles River, and I heard from a lot of our salespeople that they miss that personal connection with the client because they're obviously not traveling. They're doing quite a bit remotely, obviously, and they're using platforms like the one we're using today. And I've met more people, Michael, you know, your daughter, I've met more people's children that I didn't even know they had children. And I think it's fantastic. And I actually think we're getting closer and being more personal, and it doesn't take that much time to say hi to the 5-year-old that pops in out of the back of the river here on my platform. And those are some of the best meetings we've had. So I've been encouraging my team to take the best of what's happening and roll that forward. Think of it as an opportunity.
I think, you know, if you don't mind me just jumping in quickly, it made me think, you know, you go back, you know, 90 days, and people who had remote jobs, remote offices, you know, it was expected that you have a dedicated workspace, you close it off. I don't want to hear a dog barking. I don't want to hear your kids. I don't want to hear your spouse. It's like, it should be just like you're in the office. And I think this situation has flipped all that on its head. And it's actually made us feel like we're more human, right? It's like we have our lives, we have our families, and the same thing. I mean, how many Skype calls I've had where, you know, my team members, their kids are there, they're dealing with whatever's going on, and they make it happen. And it's just it's really been an interesting new way of thinking and working.
And I have to agree with that. And, you know, we started at the very onset, our discussion. I think we all agreed that things were going to look very different. The world is going to look very, very differently. And Bill, you had pointed out, and I agree with this so much, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to do things differently. And I mean, you know, really the notion of what Ken was saying in terms of us actually getting closer in a lot of ways, because you're right. I've gotten to know or gotten to see colleagues' families and children that I normally wouldn't have had. So in many ways, it has created this closeness. So there's going to be a very different way in terms of moving forward and working. And it's nice to see, I think, a little bit of optimism in all of this as we kind of get through that. We're going to take these lessons with us.
Great.
I'm going to jump in with the last question with just a few minutes left, and it's a bit of a more personal question for all of you. How do you feel about your work in this moment in time when the impact of the supply chain field is so front and center? Why should a person consider a career in this area? Good question.
I can go on this. You know, most of the time, most companies have vision statements. Most companies have, how do we bring together our team building, et cetera, et cetera. But it is during these times that, being in the pharma industry, I'm sure I can speak for all of us, it is so satisfying when you see the impact that we are creating, and that is an immediacy around that impact. And then people are talking about it in a broader environment. You get that feedback, and you say, "Wow, this is so good to be in the pharma industry as opposed to some other industry, I guess." But even beyond that, just on a personal level, for the work that each of us does, you know, Michael talked about the supply chain impact. Ken about you know, procurement, Bill about sales and marketing. Each of it is touching the patient in some way or the other. And when you see the role that you play at touching a patient, it just helps you, you know, sometimes work with more integrity, work harder, whatever, you know, try to get in some innovation. Either way, it just it makes you express yourself in a different way compared to, you know, as business as usual.
I will say I have a new appreciation for our supply chain managers. It's not something I do as a sales leader, but some of our specialists and procurement people have been right in the front lines. I mean, their level of contacts around the world, even with governments, it's amazing. Logistics and supply chain people are front and center in this in the crisis management for us and our ability to do our jobs and get the keep the business on track. I really truly mean I have a very much newer appreciate my dealings with you guys and your colleagues and your organizations is usually, you know, across the negotiating table, right, for contract stuff. So this is a whole new world for me. It's really been remarkable.
If I can just add to that, two angles. You know, historically, supply chain management has always sort of been, you know, has not had the really top level, you know, C-suite position. That's been universal. As I talk to SVPs, I see Bill nodding, right? So, you know, I've talked to so many SVPs in supply chain, and it was always, again, wasn't right in the front and center, like maybe marketing or finance and so forth. I really think this is going to change all that. I think for the first time, everybody has become aware, oh wait, where does my stuff come from? It's this thing called supply chain management. And I think CEOs, I think boards across the board are going to really now look at and consider the importance of executives in these roles, managers in these roles. And I think there's no better time to go into this area in this field.
Great.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, my boss is, as we call it, TET, the Takeda executive team. He is the GMSO, the Global Manufacturing and Supply Officer. He always highlights that when we're getting into these discussions, but it is becoming much more front and center as people are going, oh my God, you're right. Where does all this stuff come from and how does this all come together?
It doesn't come from the grocery store, right?
No.
Ken, any last words on this question?
Yeah, no, I mean, as I think all of us to some extent, we've been in this, whether it's supply chain logistics, sourcing and procurement, you know, for all of our career, most of our career. And, you know, why would I get into it? I mean, I think it's the most dynamic career that you can get into where you touch the most number of parts of a business. Right. So I'm in sourcing and procurement. You're touching everything from negotiating the contracts and with suppliers and finding suppliers and working on that aspect of it, to working in manufacturing. You're working with your clinical study individuals to develop those clinical things. You're working at, you know, the logistics folks when the product that gets ordered isn't coming in the door and you're having issues with suppliers. You're touching all areas of the organization, and I think it's a really exciting and interesting field to be in because you have the opportunity just to be, you know, in the know of so many things.
Wonderful. We are at 12:01, so we're going to say thank you to all of you who have joined us as participants. Thank you to our fabulous panel, and thank you to Nada for your fabulous.
And thank you and the panel. Excellent.
Really wonderful.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, guys. Everybody take care. Have a great rest of the day and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.